They left Angela Rayner in charge of the store. So when she appeared on BBC Breakfast yesterday and various other shows, she was asked about Syria, and here's what she had to say.
If Assad regime has fallen, then I welcome that news. But what we need to see is a political resolution in line with the UN resolutions, and we need to see civilians and infrastructure protected. Far too many people have lost their lives. We need stability in that region.
Yeah. It's not the greatest representation of a British government, is it, really?
What would we do without the insights of Angela Rayner and David Mastermind Lammy?
Yeah. Well, amazingly, I've not seen anything from Lammy. Lammy, who's Secretary of State for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, appears to have done nothing but put out a couple of tweets. He doesn't seem to have actually made a statement. Keir Starmer's over in Abu Dhabi yesterday. He makes a statement about, how important it is that we see this through. I mean, nobody cares what the British think anymore, do they?
Well, we've just found that. I think they're probably, David Lammy and Starmer are probably smarting from the fact that they were, excluded from discussions that took place actually in France when you had Trump there with Macron, and these discussions were being held, and we weren't privy to any of that. But, and it's important, these are hugely geopolitically important moments right now. Look, if you're a victim of Assad, absolutely you should be celebrating. But, for the rest of us, this is not the time for jubilation, because we don't know what's going to replace
Well, exactly
Assad.
Right. And the people who have taken over, HTS as they're known, I don't know how much you know about them, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who were previously associated with al-Qaeda, previously associated with ISIS as well. There's some pretty unsavoury characters in that organisation. People say that they've become slightly more moderate now, and they are, to be fair to them, offering a sort of solution for all faiths, and they haven't killed anybody as far as we know. It was a relatively bloodless coup, wasn't it?
Well, the proof's in the pudding. As you say, this organisation, very closely allied with al-Qaeda, these are jihadists.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid leopard doesn't change its spots so quickly.
Right.
If you're a savvy politician, a savvy jihadist, you want to make these sorts of overtones, because funding will come to your way from America and elsewhere, hopefully. Right. And it's essentially, they're trying to essentially do whatever they can to get some alliances, because their hold over Syria isn't sure, because there are other rebel factions also there.
Yes.
Syria is a large country. Yeah. The question is, does this organisation have the ability to actually control the entire state, or is it all going to descend into factionalism and further sort of civil war? And you have to remember, of course, that, when, in the Middle East, it's quite often a choice between a secular dictator and an Islamist dictator. Assad, Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, evil, brutal dictators, but at least they had a grip on Islamism.
Yes.
And and then once they were toppled...
And even Mubarak in Egypt.
And Mubarak. But, Libya and Iraq became even more dangerous and volatile after these guys were toppled. And that's what we have to wait and see now. What will Syria's future be?
And an awful lot of the result of that was that we ended up taking the brunt of the refugees who ended up coming to Western Europe. I mean, I was quite staggered, because I was reading about this yesterday, about the sheer numbers of people who came. Because remember Angela Merkel, who's being lauded just the other day because of this new book that she's got out as the great Chancellor of Germany. She was responsible almost single-handedly for saying to people coming from Syria, there's a war on, please come into Germany. And about 1 million came. Many of them weren't from Syria at all. They said they were. But it turns out that something like a fifth of the population, about 5 million people, are currently in Western Europe from Syria.
Yeah, 5.5 million, actually.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, the Syrian refugee crisis was one of the great events, of course, for Brexit as well.
Right.
Angela Merkel's millstone around her neck. It's been one of the motivating forces for so much of the disastrous effects we've seen across Europe. I think the British government, it's wishful thinking on my part, needs to come out and say, we are not going to accept any Syrian refugees, because, of course, there's going to be another wave, because now that you've got Islamists in power, the minority communities, as well as moderate, Shia Muslims, are going to want to leave. The Alawites, which was Assad's lot.
Right.
Now the thing is, there's Armenia, which is Christian. There's Cyprus as well. But Egypt's got a huge Christian population. Yeah. So does Lebanon. So there are places that they can go within the region. And I think it's time for the Muslim world to step up. Finally, these rich, wealthy countries in the Middle East can certainly either accommodate them or pay poorer nations to house them.
Yes.
We are full up. We can't take any more.
But also, should we not also be encouraging the people here? Because there were people demonstrating in Manchester, in London. Trafalgar Square was full of them. Many of them saying, now we can go home. Well, go then. You know, and I don't wish to be sound you know, unceremonial, and I don't wish to sound, you know, unhospitable or inhospitable rather. But you know, if you want to come here as an asylum seeker because your country is in a bad way, when it improves, go back.
Exactly. I mean, to be fair, some people are going back now already, just within the first few hours. Germany understands this now. So in Germany, you have temporary visas if you're a refugee, which makes perfect sense.
That makes sense.
Why we don't have that over here, I do not understand.
As the way Ukraine is supposed to work. You know,
Denmark has been sending people back to Syria actually for a couple of years now, funnily enough. And the British government should say anyone who fled Assad's regime will be deported back to Syria once it's safe to do so.
Right.
And I'm sure the British taxpayer wouldn't mind hiring some charter flights to facilitate that.
Yes, and one of the things that's come up over the weekend, and I've been asking this question because a piece from GQ surfaced, funnily enough, from back in sort of 2013, 2014. You might remember this. Lord Alli, that man who provided all the free suits and spectacles to the Prime Minister, spent quite a bit of time backwards and forwards with Bashar al-Assad back in sort of 2013, 2014, working, it would appear, on behalf of the then leader of the opposition, Ed Miliband, who didn't want David Cameron to attack Syria over some of the things that they were doing. And as a result of Lord Ali's conversations, basically Miliband did not support the government in bombing Syria. So I wonder what the Lord Ali connection is. We still don't really know what he was doing there.
Well, and if you remember, Obama was waiting to see the results of the British House of Commons vote as to whether they would go in. So if you're going to do a chain reaction, it could have been that Ali actually stopped America also.
Well, he may well have done, but I mean,
getting involved in all of this.
I think, you know, now that we know he's very close to the current regime in this country, although maybe slightly less so now that Sue Gray's out of Downing Street, you know, what's his interest in Syria? Why was he defending Bashar al-Assad, a man who's now on the run, effectively, and seeking refuge in Russia, the only country that would have him?
Questions need to be asked, you know, whether that's some sort of inquiry or what. But I think, you know, questions in Parliament should be asked of Miliband as well.
Well, I would like to see those questions asked, and maybe our good friends at Reform will do so. Let's see what Keir Starmer had to say yesterday.
Well, it's very early days at the moment. We do need a political solution to this, and that's what we're talking to regional allies about. It is a good thing that Assad is gone, a very good thing for the Syrian people. What we must also ensure as we go through this, the rejection of terrorism and violence, that civilians are protected, minorities are protected, and that can only be through a political process. That's what we're talking to allies in the region about at the moment.
Well, he might be talking to allies in the region about it at the moment, but, you know, the allies in the region couldn't care less what he's got to say.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. That's been, unfortunately, quite...
Sorry, they're not in the room. You know,
it's quite embarrassing, I would say, given, you know, the pivot. Even during Cameron's time, of course, Cameron was quite a mover and shaker
he was.
in the region. And,
well, he worked with Emmanuel Macron, did he not, to try and, you know, settle up... I mean, he made a terrible mistake in Libya, and we're still reaping the whirlwind of that. But at least they were at the forefront of it.
Yeah, well, I wish they hadn't gone, actually. But yeah, so that infamous victory speech that they both gave there side by side.
Yeah.
But, you know, geopolitically, though, this is not just bad news for Assad, obviously. Russia's been embarrassed and humiliated because basically it's had to admit we don't have the forces any longer because of Ukraine to commit those. Iran completely humiliated.
Blindsided,
Iran spent billions trying to support Hezbollah and Hamas and build up what's called the Islamic Crescent, basically having domination through Iraq, again, because of Western intervention, through Syria into Lebanon. That's all gone now. Hezbollah and Hamas, there can be no support whatsoever to Syria. And so all the dreams of Iran have been dashed. Russia was really hoping to become a power force and power in the Middle East with the with the reversal of America's involvement in the region, and suddenly all of their geopolitical plans have gone up in smoke.
And now there are still American troops, I think, in northeastern Syria. Russia have still got two basically military bases in Syria, which I presume there are Russian troops in. I don't know. But it seems this weekend, watching the events going on in Paris around the Notre Dame reopening and seeing Donald Trump there, meeting Prince William, seeing Macron holding his hand, shaking his hand, it feels like Keir Starmer has sort of single-handedly taken Britain out of the geopolitical sphere. You know, because he's off in the Middle East right now. He is a bit like the sort of Grim Reaper. Whenever he announces he's going somewhere, something terrible happens. You know, this was the Syrian revolution, which took about 12 days, culminating in this weekend. And here he is suddenly out of the picture. You know, he wasn't in Paris, so he wasn't able to meet Donald Trump. I don't know who blundered that one away. And now he's in Saudi Arabia, while everybody else is talking about Syria, which is somewhere else.
Well, it just goes to show how inexperienced he is and how inexperienced the government is. You know, they've been caught on the hop so many times since they've come into office, and it's just yet another reminder that we're being led by second-rate politicians who simply aren't statesmen.
No.
They aren't global figures.
They can't
they're
see things
pushers.
coming, can they? And we've got Jonathan Pole, who's one of the few people who has been involved in previous governments with Tony Blair, but he's busy in the Chagos Islands trying to convince Mauritius that they should buy it when they don't want to. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous, isn't it?
Jonathan Pole is one of the characters who was, right behind Tony Blair and, ushered in the revolution that we've seen over the last
he was one of the main guys who believed in, intervention from the West into all of these countries, which was so divisive and ridiculous and destructive in the end for Western Europe.
Every bit as bad as Alistair Campbell. I think he's quite toxic. Unfortunately for him, most people haven't heard of him. But actually, he is just as culpable for all the problems that we caused, of this neoconservative, aggressive liberalism.
Well, ironically, the reasoning that he gave for intervening was that, all of these terrible things will come back to haunt us if we don't go and sort them out. And in fact, by sorting them out, they came back to haunt us, a millionfold worse.
Yeah, with our migration crisis particularly.
Exactly right. As we talk, we're watching the situation in Damascus. I haven't seen any footage live from today yet, but yesterday it was very calm. It was all very sort of peaceful. It looked as though most people were pretty happy that Assad had gone. There was usual pulling down of the statues, the raising of flags. But, as you say, the next few days is going to be, I guess, the proof in the pudding as to whether these new people who are running it right now actually are, going to run it properly.
Well, as Churchill said on VE Day, we may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing.
Yes.
This is their moment because he was a brutal dictator, particularly post-2011 when he had to, use chemical weapons and all sorts of... there were people being let out of, babies were in prison in there, and all sorts of horrific stories have been coming out of what happened there. But, of course, is it a case of better the devil you know? This is the question that, of course, leaders around the world are going to be asking right now because, of course, we saw what happened in Afghanistan, we saw what happened in Libya and so forth, and it's very worrying. The good thing is, of course, you do have these other rebel factions who may be able to have some moderating effect on Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, but we're all speculating. No one knows the answer. This is the thing.
And what he did in Syria, as you say, in Homs in particular, we've got a room just around the corner here where there's a picture of Mary Colvin, who was one of the great war correspondents who worked for the Sunday Times. She'd lost an eye already in Sri Lanka when she was covering the terrorist attacks over there with their Tamil Tigers and all of that. She was in Homs. She was targeted deliberately. In a building which was almost completely ransacked and blown up anyway. And the whole city was kind of destroyed by Assad. Killing his own people, and they killed her. And so that was the measure of the man. I mean, he was a ghastly monster, a horrible creature. His wife was a sort of strangely fetid sort of fashion figure, wasn't she? She was from London, apparently.
Acton,
originally.
West London.
From Acton. And just incredible. Just got a couple of notes here, by the way. Lord Alli held a number of meetings with Bashar al-Assad and warned against military intervention in the country. Speaking in the Lords in 2013, Lord Alli, formerly the man that put breakfast television together, said, I visited Syria on a number of occasions and held talks with President Assad on a number of occasions. Now, why was he there? What was he doing? And on whose behest did he do all that? That's what I think we need to know.
Well, of course, it has to be said also that, Assad was, persona grata around the world as well. So he met with Her Majesty the Queen.
He did.
He met with various world leaders and so forth. But, definitely not a pleasant person, unless you're John Simpson, of course. John Simpson, BBC newsreader, who put out a ridiculous tweet yesterday saying that...
he wasn't wicked.
He wasn't wicked, he was weak. No, I'm terribly sorry. He said he was just following orders.
Yes.
It was his family and his advisors who were the ones leading him astray down this path.
Right. And it was those nasty Russian people who were bankrolling him, who have eventually given him sort of sustenance and solace by giving him asylum, ironically, granting him asylum in Russia. Very, very strange.
It's going to be a very awkward Christmas, isn't it, that day? No one wants an unwanted family coming over for Christmas, particularly when they're depressed.
Who's going to have Bashar al-Assad round for Christmas morning?